Hello, my name's Simon Crafar. We're in the MotoGP paddock in the back of one of the PETRONAS Yamaha racing team's trucks because this week's Tech Talk is about spare parts management in MotoGP. And it's Mats Melander from Sweden who's been teaching me about this because Mats was the parts man for Red Bull Yamaha when I was last riding in this paddock. I know he's good. So Matt has been explaining to me that, with these plus or minus 300 horsepower machines made of exotic materials, mostly to keep the weight down, ridden by the best riders in the world, hard, so a lot of pressure, a lot of temperature, vibration. Majority of the parts on these machines have a mileage that the manufacturer knows is safe to run for a race weekend and also for testing, which is a higher mileage. And Matt's explained why. Because at a race weekend, you want to keep everything fresh and new, new and fresh feel. And no chance of it breaking, but also feeling, performing to its maximum. In testing, you can run the mileage a little bit higher because it's not so bad if a non-safety part breaks because you have more time. But also, it's a good time to test what is safe to run those mileage. And maybe the parts regularly get to a higher mileage and they can raise the racing mileage, That's what testing's for. But also, like Matt's job is to look after 4 machines, You've got 2 for Franco Morbidelli and 2 machines for Fabio Quartararo. And can you imagine the volume of parts that go into these machines? And also Mats has got to decide, Mats and Yamaha decide when those parts need to go in. For example, he's explaining at FP1 is when he wants those parts to be, both bikes to be able to make it to the end of the race weekend, through the race. Because the last thing you want is to have it's time issues, to fit them. So it's easy to fit before the weekend. But also, there's a little risk of human error or something fitting the part. You don't want to go through that during qualifying. So the bikes, when they start FP1, everything on that bike pretty much make the full race weekend. And, like I said, everything has a mileage. Almost. There's some parts that are down to the experience of these very experienced mechanics to decide. For example, a hose clamp or a handlebar or something, then the mechanic can look at it and decide if he would rather change it and make sure it looks like brand new. And then there's the parts that come off the bike, everything, that comes off, absolutely everything, comes back to Matt, and he puts a mileage on it because he knows what it's done and gives it to Yamaha. If it's a low mileage, it's just been changed for whatever, it can go into the testing or future race, whatever. But if it's up to mileage or damaged for any reason, it goes to Yamaha and they can decide here in Europe whether looks totally normal, goes to be, destroyed, whatever they do. If the wear doesn't look normal for any reason, it can be sent back to Japan for analysing, because then they may be able to improve that part for some reason. If this keeps happening, they want to know exactly what happens to all parts. So then what do we have next? I would say next week we could talk about race prep. For example, the gearbox, the Yamaha staff sit down with the crew chief of each rider, and then between their knowledge and data, they choose a gearbox ratio, 1 to 6 gear, that is the correct one they think they want to start the next race with. Mats obviously has to have that in stock at the right mileage, ready to go, pick all those parts, and goes into the bin for example, Quartararo's bike or Franco's bike if it's the other one. And then the mechanic can build that gearbox, between races, ready to go for that next race. And then speaking of gearboxes, these gearboxes are cassette gearboxes like they were on the 500 Sci Road. So to say, for example, if there's a gearbox issue during the weekend, race weekend, rather than the mechanic having to build a whole gearbox or look for the problem, spend time analysing and change that part, they can slot that gearbox out, ready for analysing later. Mats will have, same, like I said, 500 days, still same now. Mats can have a transmission plate, that bolts into, with shafts, with the selectors, the selector drum, everything going, and it's already been pre-run in, so check that it's right. Then, because that's already built, they can just put the gear ratios on it much faster, put it back in, it's got new, selectors, drums, everything's brand new, back into the bike, and spend time, precious time, analysing the other one later, why it was doing whatever it was doing. So, speaking of pre-prepared parts, Matt's got some examples out for us. Can you imagine if you see your rider crashing on TV and the bike comes, it's been going like that, the bike comes back with a bent rear wheel and it's jumped up in the air. They don't want to leave the swing arm in it as well. They've obviously got to change the wheel, but a swing arm, here's one pre-prepared as like crash parts. This here, which Matt's already picks the parts, gives to the mechanics at a previous date. They build this up. So they've already put the bearings and bushers in it. It must have 25, I'm just looking at 25 or 30 parts on there. They've got the lines already on, the guard here, the brake caliper, the pads in it. So parts like the handlebar here already has the electrodes on, the throttle assembly. These pre-built crash parts save precious time, so then I would say I'd like to, imagine his job if there was 2 crashes in the same session, which happened at the last race. Both Franco and Fabio crashed at the same time. He's got to go for it, preempt what they need, get everything out, so when the mechanics turn up, he's got to write down exactly what goes out, what comes back. And then when I say preempt, he did it in my day. I imagine it happens. For example, he's listening to the radio and he hears the rider or the crew chief say, funny noise, maybe, exhaust. So before the mechanic even comes in here looking for exhaust, he's already got the full exhaust system sitting here, ready to go. So they walk in about to ask and he just has to go, there it is, So this is a job of preempting or doing this job well, Like I say, all of the parts that go out are used by the team, are recorded, that they've gone out and replaced. So he's got constant stock, Speaking of stock, Matt is saying the COVID situation has made things tough because the schedule is so, bang, 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 race after race. So because of that, they've had to plan ahead. And also because of parts arriving from Japan in time, there could be hold-ups, again, because of COVID situation, whether it's customs or couriers, some paperwork, getting hold of, imagine 400 packages of parts. So Matt's is saying they're planning 5 races ahead, parts-wise. And so you consider that this team's motorcycles, the motorcycles in MotoGP, only weigh 157 kilos, but this team carries 2.5 tons of spare parts. All of this, and that's even without talking about engine mileage, which we're going to save for another Tech Talk in the future. I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you, Mats. See you in Valencia for the next Tech Talk.